All right, well, it's 2 p.m. I want to get us started. Today, I'd like to start with a very quiet practice. And for this practice, I'm going to ask for our concentration and focus to sort of land down on a beautiful Sanskrit chant. And I think what I'm going to do is to get us set up and in position for this meditation. Get us settled. I'm going to introduce the chant, and then I'm just going to ask you to sort of use as your contemplation the meaning, whatever it means for you, whatever rises up within you after hearing it. And this practice will really help to sort of open up the space of the heart and the lungs and the chest. And really allow us to receive today's content, which is all heart-based, and allows us to bring to completion this unit on resiliency in our close relationships. So I'd like to invite you to experience this guided meditation from a seated position, or if you'd like to lay down, please do. It's completely up to you. You may feel like you need the extra rest today, so you decide. If you're seated, as always, just allowing those feet to land on the floor nice and light, hip width apart, so that nothing is crossed. You can rest your palms on your thighs, bringing the shoulders both down and back. Getting comfortable if you're lying down. Perhaps considering arms long at your sides with the palms facing up, which just puts you into a more receptive frame of mind. And inviting you, wherever you're at, to close your eyes. And if closing your eyes is not comfortable, always we invite you to keep your gaze soft, focused forward, and slightly down. And just gently guiding your awareness to the breath just as it is. And just noticing how the breath is in this now moment. And just embracing how the breath is in this now moment. Perhaps inviting the exhalation to just allow everything to simmer down. And maybe with your next few exhalations, allowing the shoulders to drop, bringing them back just a little bit more, so that you feel that opening through the chest and especially the heart. And when you hear the sound and the words of this chant, imagine it coming right into the heart, whatever that means for you. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. And may my thoughts, words, and actions contribute to that happiness and freedom for all. Loka samasta sukino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free, and may my thoughts and words and actions contribute to that freedom and that happiness for all. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. And gently guide the awareness back to your breath just as it is. Perhaps allowing the chin to drop slightly as you gently open your eyes, allowing the light back in, coming back into this day, back into your space. I love that chant for two reasons, both of which are really aligned with today's lesson. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. And may I contribute in some way through my thoughts and my words and my actions to that happiness. And this is really compassion as action. And what distinguishes compassion from things like empathy and sympathy is that there's not only this sense that I wish for the end of suffering for all beings, including myself, but that I have the desire and the motivation and the drive and the fuel necessary to take proactive steps in the alleviation of that suffering. And we're going to come for full circle in today's lesson to compassion for a very good reason. So in our last lesson, we were looking at sort of the very end of what it means to create a sense of strength and resiliency in our relationships. And I introduced a number of very practical tools and strategies that you can feel free to call upon. And I would love if you tried them just to see the kind of transformation that you can generate in your own families and in your relational lives. But we sort of culminated by looking at some work that came out of the book, The 5 Love Languages, this idea that most of us aren't very aware of how we ourselves most respond to love and loving gestures, how we recognize them, and what resonates best with us. For example, if we were asked very directly by people in our life who love us, hey, how do you love to be loved? it might take many of us a moment to answer that question, or even longer. And so in all of the work that we do here at Studio B, part of, or probably what's at the heart of all of it, is this cultivation of a very keen and acute sense of self-awareness and other awareness. And part of that awareness is knowing yourself well enough to know how you love to be cared for, how you love to be loved, and also what your style of caring for others is, what your own style of loving is. And really, in a very, very conscious way, introducing these notions into your relationships, both with your partner, to some degree, your colleagues, and most important, your children, if there are children in your lives, and inviting them to have these conversations so that this kind of talk becomes a very natural part of how they care about themselves, how they care about their relationships moving forward. And it just becomes part of your common vocabulary as a family, as an organization, and in partnership. So we talked last time about words of affirmation. Some of us love to be loved through words, expressions of affirmation. And I gave some examples of words of affirmation: acknowledgement, appreciation, affection, adoration, praise, and encouragement. I also talked about acts of service, that these are the things that we do for each other, that we do to each other, that show up or are expressions of love and care. And again, some of us really respond and resonate with acts of service, but making sure that you know, yeah, this is a style that I really love. I love to love through doing. I love to love or be loved through others doing for me. Okay? Quality time. And quality time, the definition of that and what that means for you and what it might mean for other people in your life is different. It might be quality time spent sitting on the sofa next to each other, binge watching a series on Netflix. Quality time might be taking walks outside in nature. Quality time might be dinner alone without the kids. Quality of time might be dinner alone while the children are upstairs watching a movie while we are quarantined, so that we can have that quality time. There's a couple that I know who, for them, quality time is, as they describe it, pillow talk. And their pillow talk occurs in that really tender space between full wakefulness and sleep. In other words, they tend to wake up and start their day around 6 a.m. But at about 5:15, 5:30, they just talk to each other, and they're talking out of this very undefended place. Part of the reason that many of us love to write at dawn or have some of our most creative ideas in that space between sleep and wakefulness is because we're really vulnerable. We're sort of in an undefended state. And when they shared the story with me, which was quite recently, I realized that it made a lot of sense, that the quality of the kind of conversation or dialogue that they share during that really beautiful period of time is probably what it is, because they're in this very kind of raw, vulnerable, soft space. So what does quality time mean for you? I ended last time with the example of the child who's asked by his father, what would you love to have for your birthday? And he takes a moment, because he knows what he wants, but he's afraid to ask for it. And he knows he can ask for anything because his father's very wealthy. And all he wants is his father. And he says, Daddy, all I want is you and time with you. And we can never, ever underestimate the kind of time that our children desire to have with us quality time, that oftentimes what they want more than anything else is not only us being with them, but being with them in full presence. And then finally, physical connection. This makes a lot of sense for us because quite often, culturally speaking, many of us are socialized or have been socialized, especially in popular media, when we think about the way that intimacy and romance especially is depicted in movies and in novels. Oftentimes intimacy is expressed through physical connection. And there's a reason for this that's also neurologically and biologically rooted. And that is related to the power of human touch and the impact that human touch has on our neurology, on our hormonal and our chemical composition. So what I invite you to do is to become very aware of what we call physical bids for connection. A bid for connection occurs in a lot of different ways. It might be verbally and it might be very obvious and overt. I long to spend more time with you. I long for us to be more closely connected. It might be through more indirect ways. In many ways, and this is where couples in particular can get into trouble, is when they're not able to read their partner's actions as a bid for connection. Oftentimes in a family where a child is acting out in a way that's confusing to other family members, oftentimes it's confusing because the parents in particular are not interpreting those acting out behaviors as bids for connection. See me, hear me, acknowledge me. A physical bid for connection is when your partner might, walk by and, grab you from around the waist, or your partner might walk by and lean over and give you a kiss on the cheek, or your partner might walk by and just sort of gently pat your shoulder or the upper part of your back. That there are these physical bids for connection when your child reaches out for your hand, when your child is crawling all over you, when your child is wanting to crawl into bed with you and to be held. So be aware that sometimes, especially when there's young children involved, parents can report feeling incredibly overstimulated when it comes to touch, like touched out. I'm just touched out by the end of the day. But if a child or a family member is still asking for that and needing that, it's a physical bid for connection. They want connection with you. Become more aware of touch that is comforting and supportive. There are kinds of touch that are comforting and supportive. And I sort of focused on those last time in our opening meditation when I told the story about my grandmother's tendency to take our hand as grandchildren. And she just used to gently, rhythmically tap it. And sometimes she would just kind of use her hand to draw circles. And I used to love to sit next to her in church because that sensation, that kind of touch, was very supportive, very comforting, and really did lull me into a meditative state. Truly, what I understand now to be a meditative state because of the neurological, chemical, hormonal changes it was creating in me, even as a child. So hand-holding can be comforting and supportive touch. Appropriately touching someone's shoulders can be comforting and supportive. Bringing our hands to our heart can be comforting and supportive. My brother is a funeral director, and a long time ago, he told me a story about being in mortuary school and having a course on how to work with and talk with grieving families, grieving individuals. And one of the lessons that he received during that time was the role of nonverbal communication as a way of expressing grieving. And in his business, empathy rules. True empathy must be conveyed in appropriate and in pretty constant ways. And what I mean by that is this. Empathy is the willingness and the ability to simply sit beside another person in their distress and to not take any measures to try to alleviate the suffering, to change the suffering, to make it different, or to diminish it. So most of the time when he's working with grieving families, a lot of his work is in silence because there's not a whole lot that he can say to change the situation. And it works because this is what most people most need in situations like this. They don't need anyone to try to make it different, to try to talk them out of the grieving that they're feeling, the loss that they're feeling. And so there were two places on the backside of the body that feel very supportive when we're grieving. And this might not surprise you. One spot is at the very low part of the back. You might have had the experience of walking and someone next to you just sort of gently places their hand right above the sacral region of the spine. It's really physically supportive. Your spine supports the body, and in a lot of ways, emotionally speaking, and we've done this before in some of our anchoring meditations, is bringing the awareness to the back and the spine as emotionally what we can kind of lean back into when we're feeling, as if we're in turbulent waters. We can call upon our own back. We can have our own back. And so just the sensation of someone's hand gently resting against that lower part of the back is a physical touch. It's physical touch that supports this emotional need. Please, someone help me to stand up and walk through the grieving that I'm feeling. The other part on the backside of the body, and I thought this was really interesting, is right at the backside of the heart space. So when we think about the heart chakra, mostly we think about the heart chakra. We mostly think about the chakras as only being as part of the front part of the body. But we have to think about them almost wrapping around to the backside of the body, these very profound energetic centers. So the backside of the heart would rest against that space between the upper and middle back. Just think where the heart is, wrap around, and imagine how supportive it would feel to have a hand there. Now, although he's learning about this in mortuary school, they were not talking about this in terms of the chakras. But what we know is, from an emotional perspective, again, physically supporting the spine as you come up the back side of the body, but we know that the back side of the heart rests there. For those of you who practice yoga, for example, when you come into a downward dog or child's pose, or any kind of forward fold where that back side, that place in your back that I'm talking about between upper and middle is really expanding. And you're sort of taking deep breaths into that. Some of us can feel how contracted that space can be. And then we know what happens when it all starts to relax. So by taking the hand to the back side of that heart chakra, we're offering a lot of emotional support. I know in my own life, when I have felt the touch of another person at that lower back and on the back side of the heart, I really did experience it as comforting and supportive touch, a form of physical connection that was very soothing, although I may not have been able to articulate why that was until now. One of the more powerful forms of physical connection is the act of human embrace or hugging. And what I'm about to share with you comes from the very, very important work of Dr. David Charnak. He wrote a book called Passionate Marriage. He's actually most well known for his work that's published in this book, Passionate Marriage. And Passionate Marriage was a book that was really written. It's written for anyone who's in a long-term committed relationship and feels as if they could use a good dose of reconnection. And there's an entire chapter in that book that is devoted to the power of the human embrace and how often it can be used therapeutically in a close relationship where partners feel like they've drifted. But I think that his work really illuminates how critical the human embrace is, hugging is, to our well-being, regardless of our age, stage in life, or our relational situation. I love this image because this is an image of a human embrace that Charnak is really recommending. Now, this is not the type of embrace you're going to offer to someone in your workplace, unless you're incredibly close, but this is the kind of human embrace that is highly therapeutic, really supportive, especially now when, if you remember last time, what do we need now more than ever? We need a sense of safety. We need a sense of attachment and connection. So studies have indicated, this was shocking to me, that the average hug, even between people that are in love or love each other very much, or that embrace on a fairly regular basis, is 2 seconds. 2 seconds. And that the ideal embrace, in order to really get the benefits out of this kind of physical connection, is 20 plus seconds. And I believe therapeutically, if I'm remembering correctly, David Charnak recommends a 90-second embrace. When couples who are sort of estranged hear this, 90 seconds, they mostly recoil. And that's very telling. He wants us to hug for that long, 20 seconds or more, so that, and this is his phrase, we hug till relaxed. We are hugging until we are relaxed. And this is what he means by that. These are the benefits of the human embrace. The very rapid production of oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine. I'll share a little bit more about that in a second. The complete calming of the central nervous system. In other words, pretty rapid shift into the parasympathetic nervous system taking over. So this can be very powerful when you're feeling really, really anxious, very high strung, very agitated. Was fairly controversial, but in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a controversial therapeutic technique that involved hugging and not letting go children who suffered from attachment disorder. You may remember some of the footage. I remember on several of occasions seeing on 60 Minutes stories about this controversial therapeutic modality, that the controversy around it was, what is the impact of forcing that kind of physical connection with children who are utterly terrified of attachment because they did not have the benefit of strong, functional attachment for whatever reason at the time of birth and through their toddlerhood. And, this is an entirely different subject area, but what's important to know about that is that there is a window of opportunity from the moment we're born. It's really only, it could be over the course of your first year where you learn attachment. And if you're in a situation where that attachment learning was compromised in any way, or you were made to feel unsafe, or it simply wasn't unsafe, it is very, very difficult to rebuild one's capacity for attachment after that window has closed. So there was some success in kind of forcing embrace, and you might see footage of a child having a complete temper tantrum and taking the child into your arms and not letting them go until they relaxed, until there was that stimulation of oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine. So that's the exaggerated version of the benefits of the human hug. But for us, we can get fast-tracked into central nervous system calming through embrace. As a consequence, experiencing frequent hugs at this therapeutic level can increase our immunity because it gives us an opportunity to really rest. When someone says, I just want to curl up on the couch and cuddle with you, that is not only a bid for connection, that is also a plea because I want to calm down. We like the way that makes us feel. Embracing in this way increases our capacity for compassion and empathy. We really get to know in a felt way what that experience is like. And therefore, we're more apt to and able to give that to others. And then again, focusing back on that original message, this kind of embracing where it's over the 2-second mark, remember 20 seconds or more, helps us to feel safe and connected, which is what we all very much need right now. So Charnak makes a very important distinction between what he calls the A-frame hug and the full frontal hug. We all know the A-frame hug. It's sort of where, again, only the top of the body is coming into contact. This is the kind of embrace that you might give at a networking event or with someone that you don't know very well, or that you do know very well, but you just really don't even want to be very close to. You've all had this experience. You've done it, and you've been hugged in this way. It's more of a greeting of sorts. It doesn't feel that great. We do not get the same benefit in that kind of hugging. If two people who are together in a relationship are hugging in an A-frame way, red flags. We need some help, okay? Because we're not acquaintances. So he talks about the A-frame hug as being kind of a signal, like, okay, we need to think about this. How connected are we really? And he makes a distinction between the A-frame hug and the full frontal hug. Now think about that, right? So we go from A-frame, where really our heads and maybe throats are in contact. Now we're bringing the heart in. Now we're bringing all the internal organs and glands at the solar plexus in. We're bringing the belly in, and we're also bringing in the genital region. Total vulnerability when all these parts of the body are in contact. Head, heart, hara, right? And then you're holding that, you're sustaining that. So the chemical hormonal changes, the presence of the oxytocin getting generated, the serotonin and the dopamine really comes from the contact of my heart against yours. This is where especially the oxytocin comes into play. And it comes into play in a really primitive way. And it's very, very necessary in mammals. You may remember several class periods ago, I talked about this idea that from an evolutionary perspective, we are hardwired for survival. And most of us know that. So we have the stress response is there for us, fight, flight, freeze. But we are almost equally hardwired for nurturance. And that's a part of our hardwiring that we don't necessarily nurture until we have to, until we find that it's present and it's quite necessary. And so you might imagine almost immediately when I say this, that what you might think about is a mother who gives birth. And one of the reasons that they recommend that the child, if possible, comes into immediate contact with the mother's skin, and they're not telling you put the child in contact with your face or any other part of the body, they're asking that the child be in contact with your heart. That's skin to the heart. And they're not asking that the baby's backside is to your heart. The baby's front side is to your heart. It's heart to heart. Then you get the stimulation of oxytocin. So we know oxytocin runs strongest in the body of a woman who's just given birth. It's absolutely necessary biologically and chemically to the act of human bonding. It is the bonding hormone. A very similar thing happens when a male holds his child for the first time. He starts to produce oxytocin. Something interesting about oxytocin and hugging. Oxytocin is the neurotransmitter that acts on the limbic system. So the limbic system of the brain is our emotional brain. This will promote feelings of contentment. It reduces anxiety and stress. And interestingly, it makes most mammals desire monogamy. This is the hormone that is responsible for us being here today, because oxytocin runs very, very high during lovemaking. It runs very high during, especially when there's a heart connection, during that kind of physical intimacy. Oxytocin runs high in the bodies of two people who are falling in love, where there's high touch, high amounts of contact. Oxytocin makes our mothers forget all of the excruciating pain of childbirth, making them still want to love us and spend time with us. So when women talk about not remembering the pain, the physical pain of birth, pretty shortly after giving birth, it's oxytocin, because the hormone that makes me want to bond is now running much stronger in me than anything else. So it's very powerful. Oxytocin is very powerful, and we generate it most in the heart. Now, what does this mean for those of us who may not have children around to hold, who aren't in a relationship, who are living alone? Does that mean that I am void of oxytocin? No. Oftentimes, when I'm leading through meditation, one of the things I will ask is that I did this earlier, drop the shoulders, drop them down, and bring them back. We know that the act of dropping the shoulders down and bringing them back starts to soften the heart, the lungs, respiration, and starts to create that openness, that spaciousness, and will take you out of this very, very contracted state. So you can start to generate your own oxytocin simply by making that tweak in the body, which is really powerful in all kinds of situations, especially situations that you feel afraid about. Like when I know I have to have a heart-to-heart with you and I'm afraid, or I know that you and I have a conflict that we need to resolve, or a negotiation that I want to enter into and I want it to go in my direction, or when I need to give a presentation and I feel terrified. I don't want to do any of that from a contracted state. I want to do all of that from an open state. And my ability to come in that open state can change everything. To come in with that soft front, as we talked about weeks ago in that Brene Brown quote, the soft front and the strong back. You know, you might be totally predicting that this negotiation is going to be really difficult, or this is going to be very, very contentious. And then I come in, and even in the way that I'm sitting, shoulders down and back, soft front, that nonverbal presence can just change the whole dynamic. So this heart space of the body is just not important emotionally. It's really important that we tend to it, because we have to remember there are very real neurological, chemical, and hormonal things that are going on when I'm shut down and when I'm relaxed and open. So there's consequences or implications for both of those stances. So there's an implication for an A-frame hug. It's going to have a certain impact opposed to full frontal. That's held. Hugging can increase our energy. It increases our capacity for vulnerability, which I believe just makes us all more beautiful. The more vulnerable we are, the more courageous we are, the more real we are. And again, this is really important, that our children are not just those that need our embraces. We need them at every age, at every stage, at every phase of life. We have to also consider context and culture. There are a lot of differences in the way that human embrace is experienced and understood, culturally speaking. I remember saying goodbye to a very close friend of mine who was a roommate during graduate school. She was from Taipei, and she was returning to her country. I was pretty certain I would never see her again. And I just fully embraced her right before she was getting ready to leave Charlottesville and to go back to her country. And I knew immediately that I had violated her, that I had violated a norm that was related to her culture that I wasn't aware of. And we talked about it later, because my hug, my embrace of her was met with this rigidity. You know, we've all had the experience of hugging someone and knowing pretty quickly, I should not have done that. So embracing is important, but we also have to take into account context and culture, especially in the way that we're doing it. So a couple of things I wanted to share with you in addition to those hormonal changes that occur during embracing. Embracing cultivates patience. By slowing down and taking a moment to offer sincere hugs throughout the day, we benefit ourselves and others, and we cultivate patience within ourselves because we're taking the time. We are taking the time to care, not only for ourselves, but for others in this physically connected way. The Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami's School of Medicine has data that indicates in over 100 studies on touch related to the human embrace that, and this will not surprise you, hugging and touch fosters growth in premature babies, reduces pain, decreases autoimmune disease symptoms, can lower our glucose levels, especially for those with diabetes, can improve our immune system, and significantly can bolster the immune system of those suffering with illnesses, chronic illnesses like cancer, even terminal illnesses. I know in my own experience in hospice work, the value of human touch. And again, think about it. If what most of us really desire to feel well is a sense of safety and a sense of connection, at any age, at any stage of life, at any phase of life, why would that be different when we're dying? What I have observed as a Reiki practitioner who's done a lot of end-of-life work is the reluctance of family members to touch their loved ones who are getting ready to die because they're fundamentally afraid, and I completely understand that. That, however, does not mean that the dying person does not desire that kind of tender, loving, caring human connection, even in the final stages of his or her life. In fact, I've wondered if human touch is as important at that phase of life as it is at infancy. And so the act of, you know, I think that that's one of the reasons why in that environment, Reiki was so welcomed, because someone was touching the patient. And someone, it doesn't have to be a full-on hug. It can just be holding their hand, gently caressing their forehead. Even if they're not alert, you will see the dying completely relax in your presence and in your touch. This is particularly useful when through the dying process, many dying people will experience what's called terminal agitation. And it's this phase of the dying process where they're very, very agitated. And if they're lucid and awake, they might be yelling, they might be, you know, the calmest. I remember my grandmother going through this and literally trying to punch my mother. You know, you'll see the arms flailing, even when they're not conscious. You'll see this very, very extreme sense of being totally unsettled, and how they can calm down if you're calm. and if you're touching them in really soothing and comforting ways. Hugging directly stimulates our immune system because in most embraces, we are connected sternum to sternum. And we know that the thymus gland, master gland, primarily controls our immunity, is right here. Okay, so if you can imagine that kind of contact, especially if it is sustained, strengthens immunity, stimulates the thymus gland. But the calmer we are, the more well we are. It's just truth. The calmer we are, the more well we are. I have the benefit of two nephews, a 7-month-old and a year-old nephew. And when I spend time with them, I try to hold them as often as possible and to rock them simultaneously. It's not just beneficial for them, it's beneficial for me because of the utterly sedating impact that kind of contact has, especially when you are heart to heart. In terms of children, the association of self-worth and tactile sensation during our early years remains embedded in our central nervous system. So if you hug your children often, know that the memory of that will be embedded in their central nervous system. The cuddles we receive from our parents while growing up remain imprinted at a cellular level, and hugs will remind us of that. In other words, I can be 45 years of age, and if I had lots of embraces from my parents, I am reminded at a somatic body level of what that means because I experienced so much of it as a child. Hugs, therefore, can significantly impact our ability to feel for ourselves a sense of self-love. So there are so many benefits of this kind of physical connection. The point of all of this is that some of us respond to physical contact as a way of being loved in very, very high ways. Some of us have less of a need for that. Does that mean that there's something wrong with us or we're different or wrong? No. Physical connection is important, but it's not always the way in which I'm going to love or express care. It's not always going to be the way that I'm going to receive it. What's important here is knowing how you love to be loved and cared for, what your style is in terms of how you give love, and what all of the people around you, what their styles are, and just becoming very conscious and aware so we can be more intentional about the way that we care for each other. For those of you who are in partnerships, there's just a couple of things that I recommend to sort of infuse the relationship with a little more intentionality. Several classes ago, we talked about the 4 pillars, this idea that our relationships have to rest on or lean into some really important structures. And if you had to identify 4 qualities that hold your relationship up, what would they be? That's a kind of a fun exercise to do, you know, with your partner over a glass of wine or over dinner together. I also recommend what are known as the 36 questions. If you Google the 36 questions, it'll come up immediately. And these are really provocative questions that you can ask each other, and they are designed to promote closeness and really interesting dialogue. if you play the 36 questions with your partner, please know that you will probably only be able to deal with the first 5 before you get to the rest. So you can sort of break them up. And you can also play a modified version of the 36 questions with children, especially preteens and teens. Someone told me recently that there's now an app that you can have right on your phone with the 36 questions. I don't know if that's true or not, but you can check that out. Narrating the story of us. We find that in partnerships that are a little bit troubled, when we ask people to talk about, how did you two get together? Like, what's the story of you two? Or what's our story? When couples start to recollect about that, like, yeah, I remember the first time I saw you. I remember that first date. I remember the moment that we decided we were an us. If you remember, years ago, there was this great movie called The Story of Us. Bruce Willis and Michelle Pfeiffer. And it's kind of a funny movie, but it has a really serious message, because ultimately they're a couple that they're really contemplating divorcing. And what really brings them back together as the movie progresses is this understanding that we are an us, and we've got a really powerful story, and we're not ready to let that go. We talked about the what matters most questions. They can be really interesting too. Like, what do you care about? What do you dream about? What do you aspire to as a person? And what do we aspire to as a couple? Like, where do we want to go with this partnership that we have? And also dreaming big. Not attaching too much to a future, but where do we want to go? Where do we want to visit? You know, what do we imagine next summer looking like? Maybe we want to downsize, like, you know, sort of what kind of future might we project with each other, as if we're sort of painting it on a canvas? What does it look like? So I'll leave us here. We're going to start our lesson on Monday going right into compassion. And some really interesting research related to compassion and self-compassion, because we are at the end of our time. But I encourage you to hug and embrace, to really start becoming aware of the length of your hugs, the quality of your hugs, to encourage you to do your own research on the chemical, neurological, hormonal changes that occur in that kind of physical contact. So we'll see you tomorrow. Again, we'll see you same time, 2 to 3 p.m. And Friday, Rachel, could
do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel, and I've been kind of quietly lurking and enjoying all this content for the last few weeks. And on Friday, I am so delighted to get to host 2 really remarkable people for our special guest, the Broadway director and choreographer, Lynn Taylor Corbett. You may know her because she choreographed the movie Footloose with Kevin Bacon. And she has also choreographed Broadway shows like Swing and The Titanic. She will be here with us, and her son, Sean, who is also an actor and a writer. He was in the original Broadway cast of In the Heights with Lin-Manuel Miranda. The 2 of them are Native, and they have written one of the first Native musicals, which is workshopping in Oklahoma right now and will likely head to Broadway. And they are going to join us to talk about the arts and how COVID-19 has affected the arts, how it's affected the theater community. Their show was supposed to open March 25th, and it has been postponed until September. But more importantly, looking at as well at how COVID has really affected Indigenous communities, and how the overlapping oppressions of race and class and ethnicity play a role in how we all experience coronavirus. So they're just 2 of the most wise and kind and cool people on the planet. So please join us Friday at 2 and bring your questions or just come and enjoy listening. But I look forward to spending that time with you. And Christine, I wanted to say I really loved everything that you spoke about tonight, but sorry, I'm in Switzerland, so it's tonight for me. Forgive me. I keep thinking about what you were saying about how important it is to be touched when we're dying. And I'm thinking how particularly cruel this virus is, and that it is leaving so many people alone as they die. And so as you talked about that power, it really struck me how tragic it is that in that moment when people right now are suffering so much, they can't even be with their loved ones. So the work that nurses and doctors are doing to witness that moment of death and maybe be that hand on their shoulder seems extra important.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so glad you brought that up. I hadn't even thought about that as I was talking about working in palliative care. That's profound. Rachel, I can't wait for Friday.
It's going to be great. I'm really excited. Yeah. So in the meantime, I look forward to seeing lots of you tomorrow for Jen's Yin and Gentle Movement. And Christine, thanks so much for sharing all this wisdom.
You're welcome. All right. We'll see you all soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.